program will begin shortly. Launch sequence. Activate. Warning, the following content is not politically correct. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back to the channel today, everyone. I'm your host, Sarah Higdon. This is Transform to Freedom. And yes, I'm back this week. Yeah, sorry I was off last week. If you guys didn't see my note on the community, I was off. I had some emergency an emergency in the family that I had to go attend to. And so that's kind of all I'm gonna say about it. As you know, I'm a public person, but there's things that I are quite private in my life, and my family are not public people. So for their privacy, that's all that I'm really gonna say about it. But I was up in Michigan last week with my family, and so being at home was interesting. It's interesting to whenever I get to go home, I got to see my niece. So it was a much needed trip. I hadn't been home in a while, so but it was much needed. It was crazy dealing with snowstorms though. Like I was going up there, and you know, if you know, I was driving through this place that doesn't exist. Okay, so Ohio is a place. There's a gap between Michigan and northern Kentucky. It doesn't exist. It exists only on a map, but it's like not a real state. And it was crazy, like the freezing rain that I was going through. I've never seen this happen. So I drive a rear-wheel drive car. I was driving up there, and I've never seen this happen in my life, where like the rain was hitting my car, and then as I kept driving around like the mirrors and up like the hood of my car and everything, it just froze, like icicles freezing around everything in my car. Like I've never seen freezing rain like that. And that is why Ohio is awful, because that stuff happens in Ohio. It doesn't happen anywhere else in the country. Either it snows or it rains, but it doesn't have freezing rain so bad that it will like engulf your entire car as you're actually driving. So that's my rant. How bad Ohio is. But I did get it. You see my new ornament is the Bucky Beaver. So I got that on the way. Because Bucky's is great. Bucky's has great food. So that's what we did on the drive. We stopped there. But yeah, so thanks for joining in this week. Yeah, there's a lot that's happened in the last couple weeks that we're going to talk about today. The first, I don't know if you saw this. This was honestly the best troll job. Like when I saw this, I couldn't help but laugh and crack up laughing. So if you didn't see this, and you know, we like to start the show a little bit light and also talk about past stories, updates to past stories that we've talked about before too. And so this one, Donald Trump hung a copy of the New York The cover of the New York Post with his mugshot. So literally every single news reporter that comes into the Oval Office has to see Trump's mugshot. And now he's the president. That is like the ultimate troll for the reporters who hated him. But yeah, it's when I saw it in this picture, I was like, oh my God, that's hilarious. Who would do that? I would probably do that. That it's great. So starting on that note, yeah, this picture, it's great. With his cabinet, with just his mugshot in the background. Who does that? Hello, Robbie. Did you really? I was looking at this mugshot and then I saw that. So Robbie Thurman says, "Hello, ladies and genitals." I'm sure that was supposed to say gentlemen, but oh, fun. Oh, other stuff that's happened. So last week, good news, obviously, RFK Jr. Was confirmed as the Health and Human Services Secretary, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And Tulsi Gabbard was also confirmed for the Intel department, which is like, again, the biggest troll ever, which it's so fitting that Tulsi Gabbard was placed on the Quiet Skies watch list, and then she was and now she is in charge of the people who placed her on said watch list. So I think that's great. I think it's fitting. It's fitting for them to it's Trump has had so far the biggest FU to the deep state. The last thing that we need to do is, or the next thing we need to do is get Kash Patel. That just completes the complete trifecta of the Unity Party, of the unity movement that is the libertarians with the MAGA crowd, with the Maha crowd, all coming together. And Kash Patel, just because, and I don't know if I don't know as much about him. He seems pretty good, but I will say the left, they hate him. And so the deep state hates him. If the deep state hates him, then it's probably the right pick, in my opinion. So if he's a threat to the deep state, I think he's great. So, we talked a lot about in previous episodes about the crazy amounts of executive orders that Trump issued just on day 1, day 2. One of those, and I actually did a full video on this one, where the president ruled that, or his executive order said that federal money could not go towards the medicalization of minors for gender dysphoria, which I obviously I agree with. And if you go watch the video that I made on it, though, however, I said it wasn't the end. I said it was a start, but it's not what's going to end this. And there's a lot of reasons why I say that, and it's because I do understand how the government and the legal system works, right? So currently, this last week, a judge put a pause on that executive order that restricts child sex changes. That I don't necessarily know if I don't know the legalities of it. I thought when I read the executive order, I do believe that the president has the authority to do exactly what he's doing. So I do think that Trump has the authority, but in a lot of ways, what this judge is doing is waking people up to exactly what I said in that separate video a couple weeks ago. Because my biggest concern is that people are going to start to get complacent, and they're gonna think that, hey, this is over. This executive order now bans it, so it's over. But it was never a ban in the first place. It just removed government funds. It also, the biggest thing though, the fact that where we do know the government does have power is with somebody like RFK Jr. at the HHS, to where the HHS can remove its recommendation for this as a viable procedure for minors. Now, that doesn't stop it from happening, but it does make lawsuits a lot easier. So detransition lawsuits are going to be a lot easier now if they even just simply remove their recommendation for it, saying that there is no good data to show that this stuff works. And so if there is no good data and then doctors are still doing it, it makes the lawsuits a lot easier, because if they're not telling their patients now this is prescribed off-label, government does not recommend this course of action, but this is it's still legal under the current system, then that doctor is taking a large risk, because they're pushing a course of action that is not recommended by the federal government. And so basically the federal government would have the back of the law of the plaintiff in a civil case of that. Now, one thing that does need to happen, I think that this is something that should go through Congress, and it needs to happen it might need to happen in every single state. It's the next fight that we're going to have, right? Is when it comes to the statute of limitations for detransitioners. So most medical malpractice cases, the statute of limitations is only 2.5 years. That's a big problem, because one, many of these people are minors. Most of them, the statute of limitations runs out before they even hit 18, right? So they can't really go in and do this. Plus, the average detransition takes place between 5 and 10 years. So if the statute of limitations is 2.5 years and they realize that they were harmed 3 years after the statute of up to 3 years after the statute of limitations runs out, they have no recourse. And there's no recourse on these doctors to, there's no incentive for these doctors to not prescribe it, because they know that most of their patients are going to last 5 years and think that this was what was right for them. And this is one of the issues. This is why you don't see more detransition lawsuits, even when you have a bunch of detransitioners out there speaking out against it. So that's one of the biggest things that I would like to see. Again, I think this is something that Congress would have to pass the law, but there should be a detransition Bill of Rights type situation where but it's going to be, I don't know why a Democrat congressman would ever, anybody period, would say, no, you shouldn't have legal recourse if you decide this is wrong for you, because they push this on you. Now, medical malpractice, there is a strict guidelines for it, right? I've often said that even for adults, right? So I've often said especially only for adults. So I've said with adults, I would honestly rather these doctors say, this is an experiment. I don't know what this is going to do to you, but it's your body, your choice. That is informed consent. They are actually informing you that they don't know what this will do for you, and you consent to that. And you, as an adult, you should be allowed to consent to that type of procedure. You should be able to, consent to experimental procedures. But when they manipulate you and say, this is what's right for you, this is what you need to get into, this is what you should be doing, and you believe them because you trust them, they are a doctor, and then it turns out to not be the case and not be good for you and not be what was right for you, then we have an issue, and that is medical malpractice. But when it takes place so much later, when the detransition and the harm takes place a couple years after, there's not much you can actually do for it. You don't have the legal recourse because of the statute of limitations. So that's the next thing that I think that they should tackle. I don't think that Trump can do it with an executive order. I think it even might have to be a state by state issue when we go through this, as you go through it, but maybe not. You might be able to do it on a federal level. I'm not exactly sure because it doesn't require like police officers to enforce. It's civil cases anyways. So that's the biggest recourse. But right now we have this pause on government funding. Now I don't necessarily even believe in government funding medical care in general, especially for this. I mean, I think that, medical care that goes against many people's values. I don't even want to be paying for somebody else with my tax money, be paying for minors to transition. I don't want to be paying my tax money for anybody to transition. I pay out of pocket for my own transition, so, but that's the only area where the judge, I think, has any recourse. But I think that the president has the ability to do this. So I think that this will move forward. This is just a stall tactic. But the HHS has, like I said, the lawsuits are what ends the incentives for the doctors anyways. The lawsuits are what is going to stop this, because it's going to de-incentivize these doctors from doing this. So that's where the legal recourse actually comes in. This order was, in some ways, like I said, this is good, because now that the judge has done this, it actually helps our cause. It helps keep this in the news, and now people are going to realize that the fight's not over. The fight to protect children is not over. So I think that's what happens with this. This judge actually just did us a little bit of a favor, because now people will not get complacent. So yeah. The next thing Trump did, which was another big win. So there's a lot happening here too, right? So first, February 5th, which was like a week and a half ago. This is what happens when I'm out for 2 weeks, right? You're missing big news. Trump signs executive order banning biological males from female sports. Now, again, this is the same thing as we talked about with the other, with the transition of minors. It's very limited in scope. The order is basically says it will cut funding for, school sports, K through 12, also college sports, that are all funded for places that are funded by the government, by the federal government, and are covered under Title IX. So pro sports, the IOC, all these other areas, they are still, they're still allowed to operate any way that they want, which means that we need to change the culture that says this is even okay in the first place. Otherwise, we're going to still be fighting. I was talking to Jennifer Say a couple weeks ago about this, because it's still going to be a fight. And she's been putting it out there on Twitter a lot, or on X a lot, that it's a fight. We have to change the culture. This is basically was just reaffirming Title IX, right? So Title IX is the law of the land. We stopped the rewrite of Title IX that would have put in terms of gender identity as a protection under Title IX, which would have allowed males and female sports. But we stopped that rewrite. And so this executive order was basically just to affirm that what we stopped and affirm Title IX as the law of the land, as the law of this. Now, this was, I mean, if you watch this, Donald Trump knows optics. This was one of the best pictures I think I've ever seen, where he's surrounded by young girl, female athletes, and he says, "Hey, wait, why don't you guys all come and follow around?" And he's like, "They're not going to like that." Basically, the Secret Service. And he's like, "If we have to worry about them, then we're in trouble." But it was good, and it was I watched it live when he signed it, but this is what he said in regards.
With my action this afternoon, we're putting every school receiving taxpayer dollars on notice that if you let men take over women's sports teams or invade your locker rooms, you will be investigated for violations of Title IX and risk your federal funding. There will be no federal funding. So this will effectively end the attack on female athletes at public K-12 schools and virtually all U.S. colleges and universities. I don't think we've missed anything, but if we do, we'll make it up very quickly with an order. With my action this year.
So that's what he says. I mean, if you hear what he says very, very quickly, there was that that it was virtually all K through 12, and it just says that if you don't follow this order, that they will remove your federal funding, which again is all that the executive has the power to do, is remove federal funding where it can be, where they will be investigated under Title IX. That's his authority, and that's a good move. But again, this doesn't change the culture. It doesn't change the same culture that I had talked about in the transition of children video. It doesn't change that culture, and that's what you need to do. We need to change the culture that says that even says that this stuff is okay. And we already see states like California and Minnesota have basically ordered their Department of Educations to defy that order, that males basically hanging their hats that males should be competing in female sports. That's what they're saying. Let me see, what is this one? But even as these states are going in that direction, it seemed like the day after, it actually seemed like the NCAA was finally taking the stand. Remember, I put another video out about the Charlie Baker, who should resign, who absolutely should resign, still, because now what happened? So now they said, okay, so now we have an executive order. Instead of standing on the side of female athletes who are suing the NCAA and need to continue their lawsuit, and I'm afraid that their point is going to be considered moot because of this, because of the Title IX and the orders now too, and now the NCAA has changed their policy. I'm concerned that they're going to not establish the precedent on this issue. But the NCAA basically said we're going to take the side of trans athletes and allow males to compete in female sports, and we will fight the lawsuit against female athletes. There's going to be a lawsuit either way, and they chose the lawsuit against female athletes rather than being on the right side of history and fighting the lawsuit against the males who wanted to compete in female sports. Probably would have been an easier win if that was the case. I mean, not with the last administration's Title IX rewrites, it would have been a very difficult case. But now, they didn't take the steps to protect female athletes. They were cowardice, and Charlie Baker, the president or the head of the NCAA, should step down because he's a coward, not a leader, and he shouldn't be leading an organization like the NCAA. So the day after the executive order, the NCAA puts out a statement and says it's banning males from female sports. This is what the statement reads. NCAA is an organization made up of 1,100 colleges and universities in all 50 states that collectively enroll more than 530,000 student athletes. We strongly believe that clear, consistent, and uniform eligibility standard would best serve today's student athletes instead of a patchwork of conflicting state laws and court decisions. To that end, President Trump's order provides a clear and national standard. The NCAA Board of Governors is reviewing the executive order and will take necessary steps to align NCAA policy in the coming days. Subject to further guidance for the administration, the association will continue to help foster welcoming environments on campuses for all students. We stand ready to assist schools as they look for ways to support any student athletes affected by changes in policy. So they basically came out with this policy, which all looked good on paper, right? Problem is, it doesn't actually do what we thought it does. See, the NCAA has found a way around the executive order again. So first, I want to show you this, and this is kind of where I was talking about with Jennifer Say, who stopping the rewrite of Title IX and the executive orders now is another step in the right direction. But again, the fight continues to change culture, and here's what she had to say.
The company that you started, I want to show an ad that you had. I think it ran over the weekend. Let's play a little bit of it here.
We should.
These female athletes just need to work harder
and not blame others for their lack of success. As the captain, Steve is very much responsible for these boycotts, which have cost her team a playoff bid.
Guess we'll see how Sia handles all that pressure tonight.
So the first I heard about this ad was because J.K. Rowling of the Harry Potter series fame, of course, she tweeted this: in years to come, a great question to ask self-proclaimed liberal men will be, which side were you on, women's rights or men's demands? And she said she never reposts ads, but she loved yours. What kind of reaction did you get from it?
Well, what an honor. She's been fighting this battle for some time. The reaction has been crazy. We've had over 10 million views in 2 days. That was all started by J.K. Rowling. And 40,000 reposts and tweets within a day, really. And I think it's just evidence of the fact that the culture is changing. People are now comfortable standing up and saying, we support this. We celebrate female athletes.
Do you feel that there are more people willing to say something? I mean, I've just been dismayed by how few women who are now in retirement, who had all the opportunities afforded to them, that don't say anything.
You know what? It's a really great point, and I say this all the time. There's not a single high-level professional athlete or Olympic-level athlete that has spoken out, or coach. So we have a long way to go. It's amazing. Like I said, Trump has, opened the door for us. But I think it's also important to remember, private institutions won't be impacted by this. The Boston Marathon this April has a man running in the women's category. That's privately run.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. The International Olympic Committee, we saw a man win in the women's boxing ring this summer. That's an international organization, not impacted. We, the people, have to now take the baton that he has passed to us, and we need to get the 70 to 80% of Americans who agree with us to stand up, because you're right. It still feels pretty lonely out here.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we've been talking about, and I think I might have even talked about this on the last episode that we did here too, because we need to change the culture. And this is what's interesting, and I think I talked about this last time, was it's literally like 78%, 80% of Americans in general agree that males don't belong in female sports. And in the same regard, I would say if you asked, those numbers would probably flip if you asked if trans adults, at least, if you asked if trans adults deserve respect in society. And I would say about 85% would be like, yeah, if you're an adult, I don't care what you do with your body. Just don't try to compete in female sports. And especially, and then we can get into the conversation about female spaces, when most of the people, though, that are trans tend to be females at this point, which is part of the entire social contagion aspect of this, is that it's a lot of females that are not actually gender dysphoric. They just want to opt out of femalehood. So that's a different topic for a different day, which I talk about quite a bit anyway. So you can go see some of my other stuff on that regard. But when it comes to male, I do think that most people are accepting of trans people. I live my life every day, and I'm every day I realize that there's not really any issues with me out in the world. And it's mostly because I am respectful of others, and I'm not a trans activist trying to force my views on other people. And so I think that most people would say that I deserve respect in the same regard, even on the right. So that's where it is. But now, going back to the NCAA, we thought NCAA changed their policy, no more males in female sports. But Jennifer Say has exposed some clear issues with their guidelines. They very what is it? They deceived. Their orders and their guidelines. Oh, hey, Rivers. It's my dog. That's my roommate's dog, actually. They deceive the public on what their order actually says, and what their actual rules are when it comes to males and female sports. So Jennifer says the NCAA newly announced policy to keep women's sports female and supposedly uphold the executive order is no policy at all. There are holes upon holes upon holes, and mostly the NCAA wants to appear to satisfy the executive order while allowing the gender ideologues and whiny, screamy, failed male athletes to still have their way and validate their kooky identities by competing in women's sports. In a case of NCAA taking no accountability, pointing fingers in both directions and saying, well, we did everything we could. Sorry, your daughter lost out to a dude. I'm saying it again. This ends when public opinion and cultural conversation changes. That's on us. Now, what is she talking about? That they're deceiving us, right? What does it say? So I went to her Substack, and she's right. She's right. The NCAA has played this smoke and mirrors game to where they are seemingly putting out statements saying that males are banned from female sports in accordance to President Trump's executive order. That's my dog. And they're not. Let me see. So she goes down, she talks about this, but now, however, let's see. The primary loophole, and the one I will focus on here, is that the proof that must be provided to test for sex at birth is a birth certificate. And the NCAA need not go any further once a birth certificate is provided, thus certifying that an athlete is female. But here's the thing. The vast majority of states have laws on the books allowing people to change the sex on their birth certificate with varying levels of requirements. Only 6 states don't allow it at all. So, if you really look at what this is saying, any male athlete can go in, get their birth certificate changed, and now compete in female sports. Now, I understand why somebody would get their birth certificate changed. I actually, up until now, I didn't see any harm in it. I support it. I support being able to change your documentation, but I don't support it for self-ID. Now, a lot of these states, let me see. So 8 states plus 1 territory require a court order and proof of surgery, which means that you have to have bottom surgery before you can actually do this. And that's Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Guam, Louisiana, Missouri, North Dakota, Wisconsin, Wyoming. That honestly seems like a reasonable policy to me, that you actually have to have a court order, which means that there's proof that you've fulfilled the obligations that would be required to, quote, transition. Obviously, you can't transition, but we're going to use that word for how it is now. But you fulfilled some obligations, and you actually went through the process of surgery, which I think a lot of people would say, if you go through surgery, you're probably set on this. Okay, but it still doesn't mean that you should be competing in female sports. Let's see. States update birth certificates using administration process, but requires, or using an administrative process, but requires proof of surgery. So again, Arizona, Kentucky, and Nebraska. That makes sense. States with unclear processes or medical requirements left to the discretion of individual judges. So you have to get a court order as these other ones. And then there are states update birth certificates using administrative processes with no medical document. So literally you can do, it doesn't matter. There's 14 states in the country where you don't have to do anything but self-ID into the opposite sex, and they will change your documentation. I don't agree with that process. I don't agree with that process. If you ask me, this is for any documentation changes. And like I said, I believe that driver's license and passports and other stuff, I believe that you should be allowed to change those, because I shouldn't have to out myself every single time I go to buy beer, for example, and they card me. I shouldn't have to out myself. That does put me in a security risk, at least historically. Being trans, being in the position that I'm in, that could put you at risk for security reasons. And so you never wanted to out yourself. Birth certificates are kind of a different story, where I can understand why you would say that you should never be able to change your birth certificate, because that's a medical document that tells what your sex is. So I think that there's a lot of nuance to this. But if the NCAA, because these states are allowed to change this, you're allowed to change your documentation, the NCAA is going to need to require blood test in order for people that can be able to compete. Like, this is what happened in the last Olympics, where Jennifer talked about. It was an intersex athlete who had XXY chrome, I think it was XXY, had a DSD condition to where they couldn't they didn't develop like a normal male, but they were a male. And only a blood test would show that. So on their birth certificate, they would have showed up as female as well, right? But blood tests show. So honestly, the NCAA, if they really want to protect female athletes, they're going to need to start requiring in sports physicals to do a blood test, to do a chromosomal test, so the athletes know, and also so that they're not cheating. Which this goes all the way down to, if you're an athlete in high school, you get a sports physical from like very young ages. You get sports physicals. All you need to do is add a blood test to that sports physical. It doesn't take very much. And actually, I would assume that a lot of people are getting blood tests at that age anyway. So a sports physical can add a chromosomal blood test to verify the sex of that person. But so if they're going off of birth certificate alone, and you're allowed to change your birth certificate with self-ID in 14 states, then that means that they're not really concerned about males competing in female sports. They're just concerned about following the rules. And they're going to find every loophole to get out of it. Now, like I said, I've never seen the harm in getting your documentation changed. I mean, there can definitely be some harm. I never agree with self-ID documentation change. I do believe that no matter what, if you're a state and you're allowing people to change their documentation, there needs to be, if you ask me, I'm not going to tell you exactly what I would do, but at least 2 years of hormones as a bare minimum. Like that would be my minimum standard to go off of. Because like in the states where you have to have surgery, I do believe that a little part of that incentivizes people to have dangerous surgeries, because and they will go through those surgeries and then realize it wasn't right for them. So I don't want to necessarily incentivize the dangerous surgeries. I don't want to incentivize the dangerous surgeries that's taking place. So I again would say like a bare minimum would be at least 2 years on hormones. Like again, there would be reasons, I guess, to change your birth certificate. But it's not as detrimental to not change your birth certificate as it would be to say have a driver's license and, you know, even though it looks completely female on there, have it say male, and then you're outing yourself again every time that you're showing your ID at a bar and somebody doesn't take it right and is actually transphobic and actually wants to harm you simply because you're trans. That could be a safety issue. Or if you're traveling overseas and you show your ID, you show your passport or anything like that, you're in an area where, you know, they may not be the most accepting there. But you're traveling there and it's an accepting country, but it may not be the most accepting environment. It can out you and it can cause safety issues for you. Those are the reasons why I think that you should be allowed to change your IDs. But with now seeing some of these loopholes to change, if they're just going to use birth certificate as the end all be all for your sex at birth, then I'm rethinking my stance as to whether you should be allowed to even change your birth certificate at all. And I haven't landed on where I'm at with that yet. I would say, again, right now, we can probably leave it because it's a state's issue, and it doesn't, it's going to be years and years before we change all the states to be able to follow. And it goes back to, we have a bunch of liberal states that are never going to change. So then you have males, and if we need to change the culture in the NCAA policy, because if we go to, basically what you end up having is a bunch of liberal states that allow males to compete in female sports, and a bunch of conservative states that don't. Or you have the NCAA who's going off a birth certificate, but if somebody in a liberal state is allowed to change their documentation and all the conservatives are not, then it's not a solution to the overall issue of males competing in female sports. And there's no executive order that the president can do to lay out and say that states must comply with, their birth certificate requirement, because birth certificates and everything else are states' rights issues. They are a 10th Amendment Federalist issue. So there's not really much that the federal government is going to do right now. So again, we need to pressure the NCAA to at least do blood tests for all athletes, not just like a lot of people say, like, you get a sports physical. When you get a sports physical, just have this be part of it. Would seem like the easiest way to do this, but the NCAA is not doing anything out of good faith here. They are actually doing everything that they can to circumvent the executive order while making it seem like they're on the president's side here. The NCAA, and like I said, the head of the NCAA is Steve Baker. Is that what I said? What his name is? Where is it? Yeah, Charlie Baker. The NCAA president, Charlie Baker, needs to resign. And this needs to change. Like this part needs to change completely, because it creates a loophole that it's basically, I don't know how the federal government fixes this. I don't know how you enforce the executive order if they're circumventing, if this is a loophole within the order. Unless they need to write an order that says verified by blood test, which they I don't know if they could, but it would seem like that would be the case. They would almost need to do that. I don't know. Yeah, Melissa Myers says, with the requirement for bottom surgery to be able to change birth certificate, encourage people, including kids, to get bottom surgery who want otherwise. Yeah, I had mentioned that. That's my concern. That's why when I put out my guidance, I would say 2 years on hormones, just something that shows that you're not just using these self-ID laws to harm people, take advantage of them for certain reasons, like, going into the female prisons, or even just to be able to use the women's locker room, for example. I would say that you have to show that this is not just some ploy for you, that this is a genuine medical condition, that you are dedicated to the process of this, but I also would not want somebody to go through like this, to incentivize somebody to go through bottom surgery who wouldn't otherwise go through bottom surgery, for a number of reasons. I think a lot of times that trans people think that there is like this end goal. And so if you can't change your documentation, then there's, and the incentive is that once you get to this point, it's almost like the state saying that, well, your end state is bottom surgery. And once you hit that, and you're going to that's your goal once you get bottom surgery, and then it ends up not being what was right for you in the first place. And then you end up detransitioning and other stuff. And I don't want to incentivize that. So I would say that to change your documentation, then you shouldn't have to have bottom surgery necessarily, but the bare minimum should at least be 2 years on hormones. And like I said, now I'm like, and now when it comes to birth certificates, I'm questioning my stance on that. I don't know where I fall yet, but I am questioning my stance because it does seem like a lot of like the NCAA and other organizations will use that as proof of sex when it's not actually a proof of sex. It's not even a proof of sex, especially when it comes to DSD conditions like we saw in the Olympics. So there, even if you can't change your documentation at all, even if they ban every state from being able to do this, you still have to do a blood test because you would still have people that have DSD conditions that their birth certificate will say the wrong sex on it. So I think that even if you did that it wouldn't be, even if you stop people from being able to change their documentation, it wouldn't be the overall solution to the problem. At least it wouldn't to change what happened in the Olympics last year. But yeah. But moving on, let's talk about DOGE. DOGE for a little bit. Now, the Democrats, the liberals, they're a little freaked out with the DOGE, right? Because DOGE they've uprooted a lot of things. They've uncovered a lot of things already, and I am quite impressed. But the liberals themselves are freaking out because they actually want to cut waste and spending, and it's a conservative who wants to do it. What they don't realize is Donald Trump did not create DOGE per se. He didn't create the department which DOGE is sitting in. In fact, it was Barack Obama who created this department to limit government spending, and it has just been repurposed to be called DOGE. So this is actually in 2011 when Obama himself created the department to cut government spending. And obviously, we know he didn't do that. We know they never do that. This is something that Ron Paul would push for back then. But this was what Trump or what Biden or Obama said in 2011.
One of the commitments that I made to the American people was that we would do a better job here in Washington in rooting out wasteful spending. We don't need to wait for Congress in order to do something about wasteful spending that's out there. Cutting waste, making government more efficient is something that leaders in both parties have worked on. We haven't seen as much action out of Congress as we'd like, and that's why we launched on our own initiative. One of the commitments that I made to the American people was...
Yeah, so he launched it, see? And guess what? They're doing a good job. Amazing to me that we didn't see this before, but this has always kind of been the speculation of people that have been called conspiracy theorists, which I would be one of those people. I've been called a conspiracy theorist over some of these issues. But you ever notice how news organization, you ever see those clips where it's like something happens and news organizations across the country are literally saying exactly the same line over in every single newscast everywhere in the country? It's like literally the exact same phrasing. Well, now we're finding out, and it actually came down because Politico, if you don't know Politico, pretty big political newspaper. They're one of the big stories that a lot of people, a lot of news organizations get a lot of their reporting from Politico. In terms of they will use Politico reports to report their stories. So if you ever read news articles, they would say, according to Politico, because Politico has the first story, the breaking stories. Unless it says breaking, that's usually not their story. They are going to reference another story within their story, and you can see it in almost every news article. Politico is one of the ones that gets quoted a lot because they are breaking a lot of stories. But now, turns out, they were receiving over $800 million from taxpayers. From the U.S. taxpayers, they were receiving funds, which is basically just a money laundering scheme if you think about it. Like, I didn't realize that every single news outlet out there was basically PBS or NPR, National Broadcast Service, or public broadcasting, right? It seems antithetical that the taxpayers would be paying for independent news organizations. It seems like a clear conflict of interest that the government would be paying $8 million to Politico. And the taxpayers don't even know about it. So they claim that this is all in. So apparently, like Politico and some of the, like, they had the news, what is it? The news, like they had a subscription model to where organizations could pay the subscription model, and it was like $10,000 per employee or something like that. And that's how it got up to $8 million, because it was like this top level subscription. I'm like, what news subscription is worth $10,000 for one person or for anybody? Like, who's paying $10,000 for a news subscription? Again, that's how the money laundering scheme is working, because then it's basically the government paying these outlets for positive coverage on them. So if you go and you think about it, it's not just Politico though. It's all of them. And so if you go back and you know history, and you just go and Google what was it, Project or Operation Mockingbird is, to where the CIA infiltrated news organizations around the world, right? They would put these news stories out there in order to gain control of the public, and it's psychological operation. So it's a psyops. It's a psyop operation. And then you think that the CIA is spending, it's the Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense is paying money to news organizations. How, like, this is absolutely large scale social deception. They are literally paying for publicity, whether it's true or not, within these organizations. You think that Politico is going to say, no, I'm not going to run this story from the Department of Defense because it doesn't seem credible? No, they're going to run the story. So Project Mockingbird, again, or Operation Mockingbird from the CIA, again, when you start to see the same clips of people around of newscasters around the country saying the exact same thing, like, that's, a mockingbird. You say something, it says something back. It's literally a chain reaction. They all make the same noises. Like, that's what it's talking about. And that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing with the media outlets. And again, it wasn't just Politico. Like, if the government is funding news organizations, then they are not independent news organizations. They are government-funded propaganda arms of the U.S. government, which means that which is very clear as to why we have had this distrust in the mainstream media for so long. Why we pointed this out. We've always had this inclination that they were in bed with the federal government and they were just propaganda arms. now we know that they were getting paid. So this is just another link into that. And this is why they are so against DOGE. It's so why they're so against Trump getting in office, is because they've lost control. And now their entire scheme is being outed. And this is where the press secretary has said that they will no longer be in the seat. And they're ending the USAID. And now it's not USAID. Let's be clear about that. It's not USAID. It's USAID. I forget what the AID stands for, but it's not aid. Here's what she says.
So upon coming out here to the briefing room, I was made aware of the funding from USAID to media outlets, including Politico, who I know has a seat in this room. And I can confirm that the more than $8 million taxpayer dollars that have gone to essentially subsidizing subscriptions to Politico on the American taxpayers' dime will no longer be happening. The DOGE team is working on canceling those payments now.
Which is good. This is what I voted for. This is what I voted for. I want, like, cut the spending in the government. Now, I haven't verified these numbers right here, but I do know some of them are close. Reuters, $9 million. $500,000 to the AP. $32 million to Political. I'm not sure about that number, like I said. New York Times, $2.6 million. The BBC, the British Broadcast Network, why are we paying for subscriptions? Why are we paying the BBC? Like, that makes absolutely no sense that we're paying the BBC. Unless it's, again, then to, like, have influence over the UK, which obviously that's not what's going on, because the UK is arresting people for free speech violations for posting memes online now. But I'll tell you, I will tell you, it's insane, because they have the CIA. Robbie says the CIA invented the term conspiracy theory. Yeah, well, here's the thing. I actually was watching. I was watching a show. God, this might have been 10 years ago. I think it was Glenn Beck about 10 years ago, when he pointed out the term conspiracy theory is not a bad word. Like, to be called a conspiracy theorist is not necessarily a negative. People say conspiracy theory as if it is a negative. But what if it is a conspiracy? You have a theory about a possible conspiracy. I can't prove that theory. I have an inkling that this is the case. And what if there is a conspiracy? What if people did get together and conspire to do stuff? The conspiracy theorists, like, what's now, and this is where we're getting to now, as to where you see that the difference between a conspiracy theory and a confirmed cover-up is 6 months, right? With the internet, we are finding out more and more about conspiracy theories. It's making me question a lot of our history, because I've pointed this out before. History is written by the winners. So if history is written by the winners, what actually happened? There's the winner's story, which is what we know to be historical fact, I will say. And then there's the loser story, which we don't hear because they're gone. And then you have the truth. You know, they always say there's two sides of a story, or there's three sides of a story. There's one side, there's the other side, and then there's the truth. You kind of question a lot of stuff when you see what has historically been considered conspiracy theories turn out to be true. or like I said, in a conspiracy theory is not necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes there is a conspiracy. Sometimes conspiracy theorists are right. Doesn't mean we should just take their word for it, that they're always right. But sometimes you're getting called a conspiracy theorist, or it's called a conspiracy theory, simply just because you're doing what you're supposed to do in questioning the narrative that's given. We should always question the narrative. Question with boldness and follow the facts, follow the breadcrumbs, because there is a lot out there that there's a lot out there that you can start to connect the dots. And there's plenty of times where I've been doing this and I've been going through writing scripts and other stuff and doing research, and just my mind works that way, where I'm connecting so many different dots. I have so many dots to connect when it comes to COVID, the lab leak, connecting to shutting down schools, connecting to queer theory being introduced in schools, to SEL, why SEL was implemented in schools, and it all connects back, and it all is this intricate web. I feel like Charlie, the episode of It's Always Sunny, where Charlie is like in front of the connection board, and there's so many connections in there when you start to really lay it out, but you can't place all the dots out there. In the conspiracy theory, there's a theory there. I have my theories, but I don't have the full proof that a conspiracy completely exists. But I have my thoughts. Is it a negative that I'm questioning? Absolutely not. But as if DOGE is doing the right stuff, and now that they are talking about auditing the auditors at the IRS, please, I can't stop. Please, I can't take this much winning. The IRS has made so many people's lives hell over the years. They audit the poor because the poor can't stand to defend themselves against lawsuits. So then they audit the poor instead of the rich. They've actually admitted in documentation that they've audited the poor because it's easier than auditing the rich. And now, the DOGE is literally following the Dave Ramsey plan of getting out of debt. Everybody's like, oh, USAID is only 1% of the federal budget. And it's like, okay, just means we have to go deeper. So the Dave Ramsey plan of getting out of debt means you start with the smallest debt. You start with the smallest area of your budget, pay that off, and then you go up from there. So you start with USAID, you move on to the IRS, you move on to the last thing that they're going to audit is probably the Department of Defense, because they can't even pass audits themselves. They've failed the last 7 audits they've been through. But you just keep going. You just keep going, and it's a snowball, and you just snowball your debt until you finally pay it all off. And right now we are starting with the smallest organizations, and punching USAID was a big one to start with, and though we'll admit that, but that's like jumping into a schoolyard fight and punching the biggest bully in the mouth and then spidering from there. So you take out one of the agencies, and then you just go from there. Now, the IRS is one of the biggest bullies out there when it comes to what their job is. Their job is to steal money from you. You got all this tax code that if you don't pay your taxes, they'll come after you. They won't tell you how much you owe, but if you don't guess right, then they come after you. Like, there's so many different ways that the IRS can come after you. Remember, they hired like 84,000 agents in the last like year, and they were teaching them how to use like guns and stuff like that. Those guys are gone. Like, they're going to audit the auditors, and it is a glorious day for America. And then so this article came out on the 14th. On the 15th, the IRS to lay off thousands of employees as soon as the next week. This is from the report. Y'all, this is good news, though I do hope that my tax returns do get filed quickly. My tax returns are fairly simple and easy, but I do hope they go through and get filed quickly, and then I can just get my refund back because I don't owe any money. But this is good news. Fire the IRS agents. Get rid of the IRS in general, to be quite honest. Let's get rid of the income tax so that way we can get rid of the IRS. Like, taxation is theft. Let's just end it. And it's interesting, yeah, because these people, they don't understand that they're doing exactly what we wanted them to do. They're doing exactly what we voted for. I voted, like, I was part of I was part of the Tea Party movement. I was a Tea Party conservative in that era. Wanted to shrink the size of government and stop all this government funding and waste, and wanted to balance the budget. We are finally getting an administration that is cutting the bloat. So, yeah, and they don't know how to deal with Trump actually doing what he said he was going to do.
It's a toxic bait and switch that is underway, and we will continue to push back forcefully.
But Donald Trump's favorability rating is actually higher than it ever was the first time around. Let me ask you, a recent poll by Marquette looked at several of the things that he has done or says that he is going to do, and 63% favor federal government's recognition of only two sexes, 60% favor deporting immigrants who entered the United States illegally, 60% favor expanding oil and gas production, 59% favor declaring an emergency at the southern border. Is there anything you are seeing that Trump is doing that you are in favor of, that you think is the right thing?
Let me say, as it relates to all of those issues, we're just at the beginning. And the core promise that Donald Trump made is that he's going to lower costs for everyday Americans. In fact, we were told that grocery prices would go down on day one, on January 20th. Costs aren't lower. In fact, costs are increasing. The price of eggs is skyrocketing out of control. Inflation is on the way up. That was the core promise that's been broken. With respect to immigration, listen, we have to secure the border. We have a broken immigration system, and we need to fix it in a comprehensive and bipartisan way. At the same period of time, as Democrats, we're going to protect dreamers, protect farm workers, and protect families who help our communities across the country thrive.
So what that shows is, yes, the American people are happy with what we're doing. It's funny he mentions the cost of eggs. Now, I will say, we talked about this before. It didn't happen. Is the tariffs. Tariffs will increase the cost of goods. We know this. If we end the subsidies for high fructose corn syrup to make our food healthier, that will also cause the prices to increase. But it's interesting he mentioned eggs. Did you know, and I don't know if I'm allowed to even say this on YouTube, there was a quote. How can I say this? The bird flu that we are seeing across the country, we're starting to see more cases. They have killed a lot of chickens. They've executed genocide on a lot of these in some places, so that they have killed a lot of chickens. So there's less supply of eggs because the Biden administration killed a lot of chickens, forced a lot of chickens to die. And if you look at somewhere like the White Coat Waste Project, who has uncovered a lot of gain of function research that's happening around the world, you can connect the dots as to what may have happened as to why we're dealing with the bird flu epidemic right now, though unverified. You can say it's unverified. They did kill a lot of chickens because the bird flu started to spread. That's all I'm gonna say. Let's hope. Like it's all backed up. We do know that that's what happened. We do know that the eggs have gone up in price because there's a lower supply. I mean, I was even at the grocery store today and they said there's a limited supply of eggs because of the bird flu stuff. Starting to remind us a little bit of 2020. And there is evidence out there that could or that may or may not link to that type of research. Can't say for sure if it leaked, but you get what I'm saying. But yeah. All right, we're past the hour, so I'm gonna we're gonna talk about this next thing though real quick, because I do want to talk about this. This is something that I'm very happy about. This is one of the reasons why I supported RFK Jr. and the Maha movement being put in the area that they're being put in. This is why I supported the Maha movement in terms of the unity coalition that we've created. And it's because of stuff like this. Robert F. Kennedy, and of course people are going to be upset at what we're saying here, but it says RFK Jr. will investigate any potential threat posed by prescriptions of SSRIs. And if you know my work, and you can go back and you can see where I've talked about this in the past, I've written articles and I've done videos about SSRIs. I don't think that I'm not going to come on here and say that SSRIs should never be used. I don't necessarily believe that. SSRIs were initially are not meant to be on long term. They are meant to numb your feelings enough to get you through very difficult situations. Yet now they are I do believe personally that they are overprescribed. They are numbing people's emotions. And they're creating people, they're creating issues where people get dependent on them instead of actually treating the root cause of this stuff. Now, these are my personal beliefs. And this is the thing, is they're talking about even investigating them as if that's a bad thing. Yes, science is never settled. I do believe that we should look into whether or not the mass amounts of prescriptions of SSRIs, if they are actually being prescribed correctly to a lot of people. I've talked about how we should be looking for different ways to treat people for mental health issues. I know a lot of people who there's been scientific studies on different psychedelics, for example, that have shown promise. I would love to see more of that stuff getting studied. I would love to see if we could replace SSRIs with a few sessions of LSD psychotherapy, for example. That's just one example. But if we could, but right now, it's SSRIs are a big product of big pharma, and they are making a lot of money on keeping people addicted to SSRIs. Now, I was on my long road trip last week. I read I listened to the audiobook of Abigail Schreier's Bad Therapy. And I'll tell you what, everybody should go read that book or listen to it in audio version, because it's so clear. I mean, I've had a lot of the inklings that she talks about in there about our mental health providers and medicine and how we treat mental health issues in the country. But she goes over it and connects even dots that I wasn't connecting when I was looking at a lot of this stuff. And she connects it when it comes to children, to adults. Like, she talks about SSRIs. She talks about the way that therapy is being misused. Not saying that therapy is bad, but saying that not everybody needs a therapist and it's being misused. How therapy can actually cause, and she says that therapy can actually cause, like any other type of medication, any other type of treatment, therapy can actually cause harmful side effects but they will claim that there are no harmful side effects with it. So I will say, go read the book, because it's absolutely, it connects the dots even in a way that I hadn't before this. And it comes back into how our mental health community is. I don't know. I've said it before. I don't know whether it's laziness or incompetence, whether they're doing it for money, or whether they're improperly trained, or whether they actually think that this is the proper way to treat people. But there is an issue to where they are throwing pills at issues. They're making a situation where you keep coming back. They're basically keeping you addicted to therapy. And so something needs to change, and hopefully getting into at least even investigating SSRIs will change the way we look at the mental health sphere. But it's an investigation. Why is anybody even worried? If you're the point of an investigation is to start out and see if there could be potential harm. If there's potential harm, we should want to know that. If there's no harm, then if there's no harm, then there's no harm in investigating. There's no reasonable reason why somebody would be against investigation of prescription SSRIs. Period. And last thing I want to talk about, again, coming down to RFK Jr., the U.S. government looking to ban junk food purchases for food stamps following RFK Jr.'s confirmation. Listen, I will tell you, I've never understood, and I understand why in a lot of ways, but I've never understood how the federal government could give people, how any government, period, will give people other people's money, so our tax money, so that they can spend it on junk food. You know, if I'm a healthy person and I'm trying to be healthy and I'm trying to live on, rice and beans with my family to pay off debt, and I don't apply for, and I don't qualify for food stamps. I can't eat junk food because I'm trying to eat on a simple diet. That I don't get to live with the simplicities in life that junk food would bring. And yet the people that do qualify are allowed to spend your tax money on garbage food that has no nutrition, that's not going to help them at all. And so, like, when I say I understand why they were allowed to do it, is because I actually think it's because the government sees those people who are on food stamps as incapable of cooking themselves good meals. I think that this is, again, I'm not gonna say a bigotry of low expectation, but it kind of is. It's a bigotry against the poor. It's a bigotry against people. It's a discrimination. Would bigotry be the right word? Maybe. Bigotry of low expectations of people that are poor. It's an elitism. It's an elitist view of the poor that they don't know how, that they would be saying that they don't know how to make good food for themselves. They don't know how to cook. They don't know how to do all this stuff because so at that point they need to buy frozen meals out of a box that they can throw into a microwave, because we don't believe, the elites, they don't believe that people can cook for themselves. Like, that's the way that comes across to me. And that's the reason why that they would have frozen foods full of chemicals, soda, chips, canned anything in their, in this, as part of the food stamps program, that you would be allowed to buy that stuff with food stamps. Makes absolutely no sense. Now, it reminds me, I was saying, like, I don't want my food to go into paying for somebody to be fat on welfare. Like, that's what it comes down to, is the taxpayer. Like, how can you be fat on welfare? Like, how can you be fat? You should be able to get the meals you need to survive and be healthy, like survive healthily. But you shouldn't, like, the fact that you can be obese on food stamps is baffling to me. Like, it is baffling to me. It's either you're getting too many food stamps or they allow junk food that has no nutrition. It's all sugar. And it is interesting. Like I said, I was in a grocery store one time, and I was watching this person in front of me, and she did pay with an EBT card. And I was like, the cart was full of frozen foods, of chips, of ice cream. I mean, ice cream is high sugar, so yeah. It had like literally just stacked to the rim of junk food, the Little Debbie snacks, like all this junk food in there. And I remember remarking to the person that I was with, there was like 3 cases of Diet Dr. Pepper. And I was like, I made fun. I said, hey, look, at least they got the Diet Dr. Pepper. I said they opted for the Diet Dr. Pepper because it just made no sense. You're eating all that junk food, and then you get the Diet Dr. Pepper, thinking like that's gonna do anything. You might as well get the regular Dr. Pepper. It tastes better. Like, makes absolutely no sense. You have a bunch of junk, and that is why you are fat. Like, and yeah, like I said, you could see they pulled out an EBT card and paid with taxpayer money. I'm going, Like literally, I could eat for as much as they paid for that entire cart. I could probably eat for a month off steak, off vegetables, off salads, off get some fruits, get some eggs, get some avocados, get some asparagus, get some, salad, cucumbers, steak, chicken. I could literally eat an entire month what they had in that cart. I could eat healthily. And that's what and that's when it really realized that's like if we want people to be healthy again, we really need to make sure that people, one, are getting Melissa Meyer says bad food causes low IQ, but I also think though laziness causes lack of educational knowledge. So I do think that there is a regard that if you go on food stamps, I thought this was even the process. I've never been into it, but I thought that the process was if you go on food stamps, you have to go through a nutrition program to where they will teach you how to eat healthy. Like I would support sending people to a nutritionist to educate people who may not be educated in that manner so that they can know how to use their food stamps properly. But I don't support whatever this is, what we've been doing. So I do support ending junk food on food stamps. Full stop, 100%. Do not give people, you should not be able to be fat on food stamps. You shouldn't. It should be, you can live a clean, healthy life if you're on food stamps. Nobody should be able to pay for you to be indulgent. So, all right, y'all. Well, that is all I had for today. I do thank you for joining me. Yeah, like I said, being off last week was not intentional. I was it was a last minute family emergency that I had to attend to. But thank you for all of you who joined this week's episode. We are set to be back again next week. Yeah. So if you haven't already, make sure you click that like and subscribe button. Follow me across all social media platforms, and I will see you next time.